Hi, this is Al Milgrom, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 73 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That would be Mr. Bob Lucius. Hey, Bob. You know, a man walks down the street and he says, "Why am I soft in the middle now? Why am I soft in the middle?"
I can't tell you how many times I've walked down the street and said that to myself.
I know, right? Especially with our wager going on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're constantly checking ourselves.
Yeah. Doing
but
the 2-inch pinch.
If you're listening and you're like, what are they talking about? It sounds familiar. That's because the rest of my life is so hard, and I need a photo opportunity. Bob, I need a shot at redemption.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun.
All right, so what are we doing? We're being silly. Yes, that is one of my all-time favorite songs. You Can Call Me Al by Paul Simon. And why is that my opening today? Well, because we are talking with legendary comic industry longtime professional. That would be Mr. Al Milgrom. And Al's going to join us here in a little bit. We'll talk to him about his experience working on the character Captain America, as well as, of course, his amazing stories about, his time in the 70s and 80s and 90s and so on, working with all these other legendary creators. So it's going to be a real fun conversation to talk with Al.
Yeah, I know you have spent a great deal of effort trying to lock down Al. Right. I mean, most folks, right. I mean, they're jumping at the opportunity to sit with us for a couple hours. Right. But Al, like he went to Florida with his wife.
Yeah. He's a busy guy.
I mean, my goodness. Yeah. So, but we finally nailed him down. So.
We did. And couldn't have come at a better time because this is going live in just a couple of days. So, yeah, and I'm going to tell everybody right now, right. This is episode 73. We already recorded episodes 75, and then we recorded 74. Now we're recording 73. So we're not going to get into what weight we are right now because it's just going to confuse matters. We'll get to that when you hear us in these upcoming episodes. But I do want to talk about something exciting, Bob, that's happening on our Captain America Comic Book Fans Facebook group.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, it is March 2nd, and we got March Madness going on. So like we did last year, we did Cap Madness. And with the Cap Madness, we did our own bracket of 32. Last year, it was 32 Captain America artists. And every day we had a new vote between two different artists. And the people in the Facebook group spoke. And essentially, the bracket became 32, then became 16, then 8, then 4, and then 2. And it was down to Mike Zeck and Jack Kirby. And of course, the King won as far as favorite Captain America artist. So we had said, all right, let's look at what we're going to do this year. And we tossed around, maybe we'll do another bracket with the artists. Maybe we'll do writers. You said, hey, why don't we do covers?
That's right. Everybody loves a cover, Rick. I mean, if you didn't have a cover, you just have the book, right? You got to have a cover, and they're iconic, right? Covers can be iconic. So I think, hey, this is shaping up to be really interesting.
Wow, Bob, that is so philosophical.
I was trying to be a little sort of highfalutin there. Did you get that? I came through.
They all have to have covers, or else they just be books.
It's an existential question, buddy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Bob, we're having fun with it, right? So this past weekend, we went ahead and asked the members of the Facebook group to post their favorite Captain America covers, and then we asked people to like the ones that they feel should make the 32 cover bracket. And here we are, Bob. We are in the midst of it, and it'll be a lot of fun. We'll be doing this over the next several weeks. If you hear us in podcast episodes 74 and 75, not knowing what the heck we're doing for March Madness, because again, we recorded that beforehand. So
yeah, you know what though? I think what's going to be really interesting, and the thing that I loved about last year's March Madness was, first of all, it was interesting. It was like, oh, who's going to win, right? But it was the comments, right? It was people explaining why they picked one or the other in every bracket. And I think that's going to be equally exciting this time. I hope folks dive right in and tell us what they love about this cover and why this cover they think is the one they're going to vote for. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Bob, that's a good point. And I think it's going to be different for everybody, right? Because I think some people are going to vote for, well, that was one of my favorite stories, and therefore I'm going to pick that cover because they associate it with the story inside. Some people are going to say, well, you know what? That was my first Cap comic, or that's one of my favorite time periods from my youth. Me, Bob, I have a different perspective, right? And maybe this is the marketing guy in me. Maybe this is the guy who, has to put together some things to get people's attention, right? So to me, I'm going to be voting for the covers that draw me in. No pun intended. Right. I want the covers that are going to capture my attention, make me want to read the inside, or at least to open it up to check it out. So maybe it's maybe the story inside is not something I even care for, or whatever the case may be. But it's like, what is it about this cover that pulls me in, that captures me? What about it is iconic, that just, maybe for its time period was ahead of its time, or it was, something that really stood out in that time period that maybe 30, 40, 50 years or, later is a little dated. But yeah, those are my reasons. What are yours?
Yeah. Well, I look at it, it's art, right? I mean, and even divorce from the book for me is like, is it art that I can appreciate, and why do I appreciate it? So like you, I mean, I'm looking at your man cave right now, your hero cave, and I know you've got some art up. You're right. You've got some cover art up, and these are covers that are important to you, appeal to you. I've got, big size, posters, promo posters up of covers that to me, it's just art that I want to hang on the wall. It's something I want to look at. It's something that stimulates my imagination or my interest in some way. So when I look at a cover, I want to be wowed. I want to wow, that's something that really catches my eye and just excites me, Yeah.
Who's a good person to ask about this? Mr. Al Milgrom. He, in his career, has produced, or somehow, whether it was penciling or inking, somehow involved, over 1,000 covers, Bob.
That's amazing.
I know, right? So who better than to talk to about this than Al Milgrom? So
yeah, I hope we can ask him.
Let's bring him on board.
Yeah.
Our next guest has been a longtime comic industry pro. With his career spanning the last 5 decades, he's worn many hats as editor, writer, penciler, inker, cover artist, to name a few. Highlights include ranking number 6 all time in inking with over 14,600 pages and over 750 different issues. He's also created over 1,000 different covers. He's known for co-creating the original Firestorm at DC, as well as a 10-year editor for Marvel Fanfare. There are few Marvel and DC characters from the 1970s through 90s he has not touched at some point. We are very pleased to have Al Milgrom as our guest. Al, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Rick. Glad to be here.
Of course. Yeah, we've been wanting to have you on for a while. We've been covering Captain America comics that your name has popped up many times, so we're happy to have you. You started your career in comics in the early 70s as an assistant. You had some work published with Charlton and Warren. A few years later, you broke into Marvel. And can you talk a little bit about how you made it into Marvel?
Sure. Well, yeah, I started in 1972, and I was close friends with Jim Starlin. We went to the same middle school and high school, and he was better than I was, and somebody introduced us. Oh, we know a guy who also draws. And I said, well, this guy's way better than me. And I thought, well, you know what? Instead of competing with this, talent, I'm going to just ink his stuff. So I started inking a lot of Jim stuff. I would, and the difference between us, among other things, was, I would draw, in a sketchbook or on a page. I'd do a page or a page and a half. Jim would do 20-page stories. He had the ideas. The stuff flowed out of him like nobody's business. It was just really awe-inspiring. And there were things that he did back then that over the years, there was a sort of a more of a softness to his stuff and a warmth that I really liked. And over the years, his drawing improved, but he lost some, it's like anything in art. Sometimes you lose something to gain something. And I still have pages of his that he did back in the early 70s and even late 60s that in some ways are among my favorite things that he ever did, including some pages where he introduced Thanos. He had the idea for Thanos before he ever got into the business. And I've got some penciled pages and a couple that I also inked where Thanos appears at Tony Stark's house in the suburbs. It's a very modest middle-class house, not like a mansion that, this kind of multimillionaire might have had. But anyway, and so it's among the first drawings he ever did of the Thanos character. But that's not what you asked. You asked how I got into Marvel. And I did, well, Jim and I both, I was in college, he was in the Navy. We both mustered out about the same time, 1970. I think Jim got out in 72 or maybe late 71, but he moved to New York. We were both from Michigan. And he moved to New York several months before I did. I don't remember the exact timing. But he, again, super talented. So he got some work right away, including, I think, among his first jobs, he got a romance story that he did for Marvel. I think Jack Abel inked it, which was nice. Jack became a very good friend of mine, but he's also a very super slick professional inker. So whatever rough edges there may have still been in Jim's stuff, he smoothed those right out. And he was doing, I think, some kind of layouts for John Romita. And when I graduated from the University of Michigan, we were in touch, and I called him. He says, "Look, you're going to come out here because we got this roommate who's moving out, and you could move into his room in our." They were renting a place from a guy on Staten Island, and I said, "Yeah, I'm planning on coming out. I'll be there soonish." And I did. I don't remember how I did. I drive out there. I don't remember flying. I must have driven. And I took, clothes and my drawing supplies and, a handful of samples and what have you, and got out there somehow or other. But then did I rent a car? I have no recollection of this, but I got there. So anyway, and he was living in a place with, let me get this now. It was Jim. It was Bill Dubay, who was the editor at Warren at the time, and Steve Skates, who was a writer for Marvel and DC, and anybody else who would accept the scripts, and Mike Friedrich. And Mike was a writer, and Mike had been out there for a while, and he had, established himself. And he decided he hated New York, and he was a native Californian, and he wanted to get back to the sunshine. And so he was moving out, and so Jim introduced me to the guys, and I said, "Yeah, I'm really looking forward to living with you guys." And Jim went, "I hadn't told him that yet." And I said, "Well, what?" I said, "What? This was going to be a surprise? Why? Tell him, hey, you got a buddy from back home. You got to, there's an extra room now with Mike moving out, and this will keep us from having to pay any, higher rent." So anyway, but we had come out to New York together. I think the previous year he had been maybe on leave or something, and we took our samples around together, which was kind of a amateur move. And I remember Joe Orlando was looking at it, and he was, he's better than you are. I said, yes, I'm aware, but Jim actually picked up a couple little 1 or 2 page House of Mystery, House of Secrets, short thingies just to do, to break them in. And I was hoping they'd let me ink them, but no, they got Dave Cockrum. I remember inked one of them. He was still just on the cusp of starting to get work up there. And I think the other one was inked by Wayne Howard, who was, he was a pro working for Charlton, and he had his whole style was very much based on Wally Wood stuff. And he was good. He was solid. Anyway, so I didn't get that. That didn't get to be my premiere. But I also did a job for Rich Buckler, who had been a friend of mine. Buckler had moved out to New York also from the Michigan area originally. And we'd met and were friendly at the time. And he said, "Oh, I got a guy out here who's doing a job for Charlton, and he's penciling it, and he needs an inker. Would you be interested in inking it?" And I said, "Would I? And I think they paid me $10 a page, which was not wrong considering the Charlton rates at the time. So it was a guy named Jimmy Janes, very solid guy. I think he got into animation later and stuff, but he did comics for a while. And they sent me the story, and I inked it and sent it back in. And I remember it was hard to do because I'd only ever inked myself and Starlin prior to this. But it turned out okay, and it saw print because Charlton wasn't real picky, so that worked out. So anyway, that's still not what you asked. So I moved out in '72 and moved in with Starlin and those guys. And I remember I was showing samples around. I went up to Marvel, I went up to DC, I went up to Warren. And Jim Warren was a character. He says, "Look, I've learned that, people give advice. Nobody listens to them unless they have to pay for the advice." So I said, "Okay." And he says, so he had like some kind of tube, and he says, "Here, put 50 cents in this tube." And I think it was earmarked for some charity or something, or maybe he put it in his pocket later. I don't know. But so I paid him 50 cents, and he says, "Okay, here's what's wrong with your stuff." And he went down a long list and blah, blah, blah. And he says, "So, but you'll have to work on improving all this before you can get work up here." I said, "Okay, thanks." It was an interesting experience. He also quoted, he said, "And remember, less is more." I said, "Less is more." Uh-huh. He says, "That's not my quote." He says, that's a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, I found out later it was actually Wright's teacher, Mies van der Rohe, who was an architect, who came up with that phrase. But it's not bad advice. Alex Toth certainly lived by it. So that's a good source. Anyway, so I took my samples around, didn't get a lick of work. Buckler wanted me to work for him. And I don't know how much. I know we're supposed to be talking about Cap, so I won't go into too much detail, but let's just say it didn't work out. And in fact, over a 2 or 3 week span, the idea was Rich was doing layouts or breakdowns, and I was tightening them up to make them full pencils. Now he'd been in the business about 5 minutes, and he was already acting like an old pro who had to hire assistants and to try to produce more stuff and so on. And he drew a lot better than I did. Also, I had a tendency to get involved with guys who drew better than I did, but then who doesn't? But anyway, and we went through all kinds of machinations. He would get migraines. One day he wanted to go to work. He says, "The great thing about being a freelancer is you can work from anywhere." So he was living out on Long Island, and he packed up his wife and his nephew who was visiting, and they made a picnic lunch, and we went to the beach, And we got to the beach and we unpacked everything, except we realized we'd forgotten the picnic lunch. So then we had to drive back to his house to get the lunch. And then we went back to the beach and we ate the lunch. And then, we both had lap boards with us, and he put his pencil on the paper and he says, I'm getting a migraine. I can't work. We have to go back. So we went back to the house. So over the course of like I said, 2 or 3 weeks, he had me actually move in with him for a while. We did, I think, a total of it wasn't even 12 pages, but, I was getting $5 a page for finishing up his pencils. And in the meantime, I had gone to the Phil Suling Comic Convention, which was the big comic convention at the time in New York City. And I'd visited DC and Marvel, and at DC, they introduced me to Murphy Anderson, who was a wonderful, old time artist. Yeah, I mean, he was probably in his 40s at the time, but seemed like an older guy to me. And, terrific penciler, terrific inker, very solid. And he was looking for a background guy. And so they offered me a job to come in and work every day, because he used to come in from Jersey and sit at DC and ink pages over Kurt Swan, over Irv Novick, over, wasn't doing any Carmine at the time, but, he's a real solid pro. And he had, on and off been doing penciling for decades. And at the time, I think he got the Korak strip, Son of Tarzan, for the Edgar Rice Burroughs books that they were doing at the time. So, he didn't want to be pigeonholed as just an inker, and advised me the same, but he was doing both, and he offered me a job. So I said, well, can I get back to you? And he said, sure, take your time, whenever. And once I realized it wasn't going to work out with Buckler, I called him up and I said, gee, if you don't mind, I think I'd like to come work for you. And he said, that'd be great. And, come in whenever it's convenient, and we'll sit you down and you'll work sitting right next to me. I said, good. And in the meantime, Buckler was in hot water because he wasn't paying his phone bill. And Starlin and I went into Marvel one day. Jim was dropping something off, and Jim was a super pro. I mean, he never missed a deadline, as well as being really good. And Roy Thomas came running out because he knew the 2 Detroit boys were in the waiting room, and he said, "You guys, you're Buckler's friend. We can't reach him. His phone's disconnected. He owes us this Man Thing job." At the time, Rich was doing Kazar and Man Thing both, and if he doesn't show up with that entire job by Monday, he's fired and he'll never work for us again. And so we went, is this our problem? But we thought, well, maybe we should try and do something for him. So we hopped on Jim's motorcycle, and again, we're on Staten Island. Buckler was on Long Island. It's not an easy get to go from one to the other. I don't remember how we went from the city out to Buckler's place on Long Island. And we show up at his door, and he goes, "What are you guys doing here?" And he said, "Well, Roy says you're fired if you don't get this job in." And by the way, he had also told us that he was very upset because they specifically wanted this hot young talent, Rich Buckler, to do the Man Thing stuff to compete with, Bernie Wrightson on Swamp Thing, which both, came out about the same time. And he said, they're very aware that whoever, and he, at the time, Buckler was getting, again, Bill Dubay, who was a writer and an editor and a penciler, to tighten up his pencils on Man Thing. And they said, nothing against Bill, but the stuff doesn't look like your stuff at all when he gets done tightening it up. And Roy's real upset about that. And he goes, "Oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to?" And so Starlin said, "Don't worry, we'll come in, we'll sit down, give us the Man Thing plot. You can lay out pages. Al will tighten them out. I'll take some pages and I'll draw them. And it was half a book at the time, I think. So he said, so it was a 12 page story. And over the course of the weekend, we penciled the whole job. And as we're leaving, Buckler said, "Well, you guys, you really saved my life here, and thanks. And how can I repay you?" And Starlin magnanimously said, "That's okay. Sometime you can help me out on a job when I'm behind." Never happened in his whole life. And I said, "And as far as I'm concerned, Rich, just pay me the $5 a page that was our arrangement. When I was doing the Kazar stuff." And I said, "But listen, I got an offer to go work for Murphy Anderson at DC, and I think I'm going to take it." And he looked at me like incredulous and said, "Well, why? Why would you take that?" I said, "Well, he's offering me steady work, and in the last 3 weeks all I've earned from you is $60." And I said, I don't think I can live in New York on $60 a month. It's not going to work out. And he said, "But I can teach you a lot more than he can." And I went, here's this established pro, Murphy Anderson, who's, great, used to do the Buck Rogers comic strip and everything. And here's, like I say, a guy who's a contemporary of mine and who's been in the business for 5 or 10 minutes. I said, "Maybe, but I still think I need the steady work. And so, sorry about that." And then in the meantime, it took me about 3 or 4 years to get paid. I hounded him every time I saw him. "Hey, where's that $60 you owe me, Rich?" He also then had the nerve to tell another guy he was working with that I once charged him for doing him a favor. I said, and I told the guy the story. I said, I wasn't doing him a favor. I was his employee, and he took 3 years to pay me my lousy $60. So what do you think? He says, "Oh, no, that wasn't a favor. You had an arrangement." I said, "Yeah."
Right.
Okay, so now I bored you with that one. But I worked for Murphy for almost exactly a year, like from July to July, 72 to 73. And towards the end of that stretch, aside from inking his backgrounds and learning at the foot of a master, just about that time, Dave Cockrum he had gotten the Superboy strip, and I don't know if it was in Superboy or Adventure, but one or the other. And he said, "Al, I'm having trouble." He was penciling and inking it himself. He said, "I'm having trouble getting all the pages done. Could you help me out?" And I said, "Sure. What do you need?" He says, "I need 4 pages inked, and don't touch the faces. I'll do the faces, but just ink everything else." So I did. And while that was happening, Starlin got a job doing a backup story for a book called Sword of Sorcery, I believe it was. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that one featured Fafford and the Gray Mouser, which was a series of books by I can't remember the author's name now. Oh well, that's old age for you. Anyway, Chaykin had been doing the lead feature on that, and then I think there was another guy now I'm forgetting his name, from Canada, who was working on it with him. And anyway, a lot of guys pitched in on that book, and they gave Jim Starlin the backup story, which was a Gray Mouser story. Jim's pencils were, tight as a drum. I mean, you couldn't ask for tighter pencils. And he said, "Look, I asked for you to ink this job." I said, "Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it." So, and again, this is for DC, but Jim was primarily working for Marvel already at the time. And so I inked the job, and I did a good job, very tight. And, and Jim said, "Oh, this looks great." And, I showed it around, and I think that was how Cockrum knew that I was competent enough to help him on his stuff. And then at the same period, Walt Simonson, who I knew a little bit because, everybody used to hang out at the DC coffee room, and, they had a break room there. And he also was having deadline problems. And in his case, he was doing the lead story for the same issue of Sword of Sorcery that Starlin had done that backup story for. So he was doing the Fafford Gray Mouser story. And he said, "Look, I'm up against it. And, I see what you did over Starlin. It looks great, and how about if you come out to my apartment and you move in with me for the week. And I did, real loose layouts for the lead story, but I can tighten them up and hand them to you, and you can ink them, and we can both be working on the job at the same time. And I said, sure. And the timing was good because Murphy had decided to leave comics and work on PS Magazine, which was this preventive service maintenance magazine published by the Army. And he had worked on it previously for Will Eisner. They use it as an educational tool for soldiers, and with illustrations in case they weren't good readers. And so he was very familiar with the magazine, and he put in a bid, and he won the contract. And he asked me if I wanted to come work on the magazine with him. And I said, it just doesn't sound like something I'd like to do, Murph. I want to do comic books. And he says, look, I got to warn you, this industry is not long for this world. It may not be here in 5 years. I said, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. So anyway, so he says, okay, well, I wish you luck. And
you made a good choice there, Al.
Well, for me, certainly. And especially since the next time around when he was doing a wonderful job on PS Magazines, Frank Giramonte, I think, was working for him at the time, and probably others as well. But, when it came up for renewal, he put in another bid, and the Army went with somebody who underbid him, and then they couldn't produce the book. They, from the get-go, they were like behind the 8 ball. And then the Army called Murphy up and said, look, we made a mistake. This guy's screwed us over, and he can't make a deadline, and he can't get the book out. And they said, would you come back and do PS for us? And he said, no. He said, nope. I made a fair offer. You turned it down. I'm back doing comic books. Basically, screw you. Screw you, U.S. Army. So so anyway, and Murph was a real Southern gentleman type of guy, and a sweet guy and honorable. And he felt like, by turning down his bid after he had proved to them that he could do the job, that it was an insult to him, and he didn't want to work for him anymore. So anyway, in the meantime, Starlin took me up to Marvel with him. And we had Xeroxes of the Gray Mouser story that we'd done together. And he walked into John Verpoorten's office. John was the production manager at the time for many years at Marvel. Big, heavy guy, always smoking a pipe. And we walk into his office, and Jim says, John? And John was always reading a stack of pages, proofreading or whatever. And he looks up, over his half glasses, looking at us. He goes, yeah, Jim, what's up? He says, this is Al Milgrom. He's going to be inking Captain Marvel from now on. And and John just looked at me, and he went, he shrugged, and that's how I started in at Marvel, through the offices of Jim Starlin. And also things were so hectic and chaotic. You would have thought I would have had to go through some kind of chain of command, talk to Stan, talk to Roy Thomas, let him see, samples or whatever. No, he just walked in and said, John, my buddy Al here is going to be inking me from now on. What? Yeah, I did, so I did. I mean, just based on his own, I don't remember how he worked out my page rate or anything like that, but, started inking him on Captain Marvel.
That's a fun story.
Awesome.
Thanks for taking us through. I just you mentioned so many names there, right? So you obviously talked about Jim Starlin, but you also mentioned Howard Chaykin. You mentioned inking Walt Simonson. You talked about Bernie Wrightson on being on Swamp Thing. At one point in the 1970s, you lived in the same apartment building as these guys, right?
Yes.
I mean, and these are all creators that went on to have legendary careers.
Yeah.
What kind of stories do you have of that, of being with Walt and Howard and Bernie?
Well, what happened was the group on Staten Island that I was with, those guys that I mentioned earlier, we all went our separate ways for one reason or another. I don't remember what precipitated it, And I was working at the DC offices, as I said, and I got friendly with Elliot Magan, who was writing Superman at the time. And I think he had an apartment in Queens, and it was a 2-bedroom, and he didn't want to pay the whole rent himself. And he asked if I'd be interested in moving in and taking the other bedroom. And I said, sure. And I did. And this apartment in Queens, we lived there together for a period of time. I don't recall how long. But at some point, he moved out to move in with his girlfriend. And I thought that was understandable. And so there I was supporting the apartment by myself, which I actually could have done. I was making enough money already at the time that was not an issue. But after the experience I had with Walter, moving into his apartment for a week and producing that job together, and he was living in Brooklyn at the time, I should say. I said, "Hey, Walt, we liked each other quite a bit." And I said, "Any interested in moving in? I got an open bedroom here in this apartment, and if you're interested, you could move in. We could split the rent." He said, I didn't really realistically think he was gonna, but he said, "Yeah, that sounds kind of good. I'd like that." And so he moved in with me whenever his lease was up, I guess. And in the meantime, living down the block from Walter in Brooklyn was both Howard Chaykin and Alan Kupperberg. And Kupperberg was sort of like a moray eel on the back of a shark. Is that the ones? Are those the ones that attach themselves to? No, not moray eels. Lampreys.
Yes.
Anyway,
yes.
But he really liked Chaykin, and he used to follow him around wherever Chaykin moved. Kupperberg would follow. And sure enough, sometime after Walt moved in with me, Chaykin found a vacancy in the same apartment building, and he moved in also. And then at some point, Alan did too. So all these guys had their own apartments there, and so we're all hanging out and working together. And I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but at some point, Wrightson moved in also to another apartment. Maybe Kupperberg, took his over when he left. I don't remember the sequence, unfortunately. My memory's not that good. But at various points in time, all of those guys, were living in that building in Queens. And at some other point, Roger Stern moved in there also.
Wow.
I think he was, there was some musical chairs going on there where somebody would move out of an apartment, and when they found out there was a vacancy, somebody else would move into the apartment. So, in fact, one of the best things that happened to me there. Oh, and after a while, Simonson moved out to move in with his girlfriend. We lived there a couple of years first, but he was living with Louise Jones, who is now Louise or Wheezy Simonson, and she had previously been married to Jeff Jones, the painter and illustrator. So there was all kinds of interactions and people living there and moving out. I thought I was a great roommate because anybody living with me would ultimately get a girlfriend and move out and move in with a girlfriend. So I thought, that's a good catalyst.
Sure.
There was a movie about that. Some guy, he would date a girl, and then the next guy she dated, she would marry. And so I was good luck. So anyway, that's what was going on there. And but one time, Walt and I were hanging out, and Bernie called up from down. He was a couple floors below us. And he says, "Hey, you guys, I'm cleaning out my files. You want to come up here and see if there's anything you want?" And so we said, "We'll be right down." And so we went down, and he had a stack of artwork that he was throwing out. And so we, it was like, picking up for a baseball game, I'll take him. Okay, then I'll take him. So Walt took a page, and these pages were a variety of things. There were several beautiful finished pieces, fully inked, and some that were half inked, and some that were only in pencil form. I have one sheet that all it is a bunch of little drawings of eyeballs, noses, lips. Nope, never, not a complete face in the bunch, but just, features, different angles, different sizes, different shapes, different characteristics. I just love that. I was like, how does that mind work? But, Bernie was a super talent. I mean, possibly the most talented guy of that era, just a natural talent, and he kept getting better and better. And the sweetest guy you'd ever want to know. So, Walt takes a page, I take a page. Walt takes a page, I take a page. And then we got to a point when Walt said, that's enough. I got all I really want or could use in any way. And I said, Bernie, if you're throwing this stuff out, I'll take everything else. And so I did. I had a nice little stack of variously finished Bernie Wrightson artwork, which I still have to this day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Gold
So that was nice.
What a treasure.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
So, Al, this is after all, this is a podcast that is focused on Captain America. So we do want to turn to your work with the character. In our last episode, we reviewed Captain America number 260, a 1981 story you wrote and helped ink.
Well,
it was sort of
the cover.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that. The cover was magnificent. Right? Yeah, it was sort of a sequel to the Stan Lee, Don Heck, Dick Ayers 1965 story in Tales of Suspense 62. Had some of the same characters.
Now wait a minute.
But hold on. We'll let you get to that. But what inspired you to bring some of those characters back?
Well, are you sure about the Don Heck? Because I remember it being a Kirby story. Somebody look it up on.
Yes, I will confirm that as we.
Here's a free plug for Grand Comics Database.
Yeah, that's a good site.
I distinctly remember that Thumper character, the convict with these enormous hands, who was supposed to be a real badass. And I remember he and Cap punching their fists together, and Cap getting the better of them and stuff like that in the original story.
Right.
And I remember it being Kirby, and I can't remember if it was Chick Stone or maybe Frank Giacoia, but I'm 99% certain it was Kirby.
But you're right, Al. It was the Iron Man story that was penciled by Don Heck.
Not that there's anything wrong with Don Heck. I love Don Heck and I love his work. In fact, I just did a piece for a guy where he wanted me to do an exact replica of a Don Heck Iron Man drawing in the end papers of a Marvel Masterworks Iron Man compilation. So that was interesting. But Don was a sweet guy, and I loved him, and we used to chat a lot. And he was doing work for me at DC and stuff like that. So, I respect Don a lot. I thought it was a Kirby job because it just stuck in my mind. Now, I don't remember why. I was not much of a writer. I didn't do a lot of writing in my career. I've done a handful of jobs. I don't know if they were desperate for a fill-in issue. I don't know who did the issue before mine or who did the issue after it. I have no recollection of any of that. But I don't know if I volunteered for it or if they said, "Hey, Al, can you write a quick fill-in issue?" I mean, I wouldn't have been the guy they'd have gone to. I wouldn't have thought. But at that period, Marvel was scrambling to, this was Shooter was the editor-in-chief by that time. Yes.
And you're absolutely right. Thanks for bringing that up, because we're taking a look, and I do believe this is the first published written story for you, other than back maybe Eerie by Warren.
Yeah.
Now you're right. It was a fill-in. There was some David Michelini issues before that. Then after you, J.M. DeMatteis kicked on. So here's this.
It's J.M. DeMatteis.
Well, it's funny you should say that.
Did he say it's DeMatteis?
He says when we had him on the show, he said it's DeMatteis.
Okay.
But don't worry, you're in good company, because when we had Jim Shooter on the show, he corrected us as well.
Yeah.
That's
what I think he told me one time, because I saw him at a con last year. And he said it was always, DeMatteis, was that right?
Sure.
DeMatteis, which is
now he says DeMatteis.
DeMatteis. he says, it was always DeMatteis, but people kept calling me DeMatteis, and I just didn't bother to correct him. So yeah, he did tell me that. You're right.
Oh, okay.
I'm always correcting people about, the Buscema brothers too, because they all say Buscema, but it's not a hard C in that word, in that name. So
yeah, Buscema, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about issue 260. So it's titled Prison Reform.
Yep.
And you referenced some thoughts on that subject with some of your characters. So
right.
Early in the story, there's a time where Cap is in his cell with the Thumper, the one you mentioned before from Tales of Suspense, and a young man. And after hearing his story and seeing how Thumper's trying to influence this young man, Cap thinks to himself, and I'll quote, "This is a typical case of the prison system taking a young offender and turning him into a hardened criminal.
Right.
It exposes him to desperate, hopeless men who teach him the tricks of their dishonest trades. It's a system that must be changed." And that's something that you wrote in Cap's voice. And this topic gets approached again a couple more times in the issue.
Yeah.
And it seems like that was the main message behind your story. So was this something that was really at the time pressing on you, or was this more in response to the Criminal Justice Reform Act that was being discussed in Congress at the time?
Well, I'd like to say that both of those things were true, but neither of them are.
All right. Now we get behind the story. Love it.
Yeah. Well, it's true. Listen, no one ever thought prisons were a good solution to the situation of crime and crime spreading, and being, it's something I'm sure I'd heard before. I don't think I was aware that this act was being considered, this Prison Reform Act. It was just something that, as a rule, it was general knowledge, hey, you send a guy to prison, it doesn't teach him a trade necessarily. It doesn't reform him necessarily. And what it is probably best at doing is throwing him in with other criminals who can tell him how to hone his craft. So it was just a general knowledge kind of idea. And, it's funny because as a rule, what I liked about Marvel was just, let's have action, let's have a supervillain, let's do all that stuff that Lee and Kirby did together that I love so much. And yet, here was a social issue kind of a thing that I picked up and went with. And again, the original story that Stan and Jack had done, the main thrust of it was they installed this magnetic lock on the main prison door, which could only be opened by the sound of a certain set of syllables, which were, quote, Captain America. And I think, at some point in my story, I think I had somebody saying, "Hey, who sent you up this time, Louis?" And he said, "It was that, what can you believe, it was one of those costume long underwear guys, Captain America," and the door sprung open. So, somebody said, "Oh yeah, maybe that was not well thought out," So then they changed it back to the old fashioned kind of, locked prison door. And, and then I changed it to, Cap getting in the cell with, his greatest foe in the particular prison, who was no match for Cap, of course, and this relatively green kid who got caught up with a bad crowd and yet somehow got, sent up for hard time. And I don't know, I don't remember if I wrote him as a, multiple offender or what, but, he clearly was out of his depth there. And frankly, what we know about prisons now, here's this young blonde guy. I suspect he would have been somebody's girlfriend in about 10 minutes. Maybe Thumper was keeping him from that kind of, sordid, degradation. But anyway, so, the premise of the story was that, Cap was, the warden was an old buddy from World War II. Cap obviously had weathered the years better because he'd been frozen in ice, but he asked Cap to come in and test their security to see whether they were, they were doing, if it was secure enough, just to keep all the bad guys in where they were supposed to be. And so, Cap immediately goes to work trying to figure out a way to escape the jail. And there's a bunch of reporters present. And if you look at it, there are characters in there who are clearly Clark Kent and Jimmy Olsen. I don't know if you noticed it. Huh?
No, it's very nice. Very cool.
Yeah, well, that wasn't my idea. I don't think, it might have been in the plot. I don't know. Kupperberg, a lot of us would do that, actually. If we drew, like the Daily Bugle, there'd be Clark Kent standing around in the background, which meant a guy with a fedora and glasses, and wide shoulders, or Lois Lane would be there, Jimmy Olsen would be there. In this case, they colored his hair brown so they couldn't get sued, probably. I doubt anybody would have really freaked out over it. But so I saw that after all these years. I hadn't read the story in a long time. And I said, oh, there's Kupperberg. There's there, throwing in Clark Kent and Jimmy Olsen. There you go. So that was fun. Cap is trying to figure out a way to save the kid. And the kid, helps him in a situation where, the bad guys are laying for him and they're going to jump Cap. He says, Cap, don't go in there. They'll beat you up. Of course, Cap is up to any challenge in there. You'd think if enough guys grabbed him, maybe they could beat him up. But super soldier, he's hard to beat. So anyway, and finally, there's that. I can't remember the name of the deacon. Is it the little smart criminal? He's in there and he says, "Look, stop trying to, bump off Captain America." He says, "Why? I hate that guy." He says, yeah, but his job, he was a trustee, the deacon, and he's smart. And he says, if he's going to break out, we can, follow on his coattails and break out at the same time. And, if enough of us make the break, they won't be able to capture all of us. So some of us will get away. And so he explains this to Thumper, who basically thinks with his fists. And he says, "Hey, Dad, that's a good idea. We should, that's better than just beating him up. I could beat him up later, although obviously not, because he lost every encounter with him. But so anyway, so sure enough, they decide to keep an eye on Cap. And in the meantime, Cap somehow surreptitiously made a small version of his own shield in workshop there at the prison. So at least Captain America is getting a good trade out of it. If none of the criminals are, at least none of the convicts can do anything. But Cap's making a shield. He says, slips it under his tunic, shirt, whatever. And sure enough, and then he's got a little piece of metal that he squirrels away and he takes it. I don't know. I mean, these guys must be walking around with a million shivs, waiting to shank guys because they're all there. He's stealing, pounds of metal out of metal shop and nobody.
Right.
Maybe I didn't think that one through, but so he, as they close the cell doors for the night, he slips a piece of metal in to keep the latch from clicking in there. You'd also have thought that maybe there would be some system that would say, this door is still open, but apparently not. I guess it was an older prison. So, sure enough, he, when everybody's supposedly asleep, he pries the door open. He starts going down the corridor and the deacon, lets everybody out of their cells and he's got keys because he's a trustee. So Cap's making a break and then half the prison is also following after him, at a safe distance, I guess. And, Cap gets outside and he gets into the courtyard and he throws his makeshift shield perfectly, even though he claims it's not balanced as well as his shield, of course. And the shield cuts the rope on the flagpole so that it's still attached at the top, but the rest of it flops down into the courtyard. And Cap grabs the rope and then somehow manages to get enough of a running start to get enough momentum to swing up and over the wall, thus making a successful prison break. And all these prisoners who have made a break for it are going, "What the hell? We can't do that."
Right.
This guy is like the, epitome of the supreme physical perfection of a more or less normal human. or super soldier. So, we pulled this whole thing for nothing. It's not going to do us any good, except we can mill around in the courtyard so people shoot us. So, and the guards come running out and they say, get back in your cells. And they do. And so, and then the reporters are all going, well, look, Captain America broke out. So, your prison, you were claiming it was so secure and it's not. And, there's a reporter there named Hildy, which I assume I stole from his gal Friday.
Okay.
The movie?
It's
about Cary Grant and who was the girl? Was it Irene Dunn? I don't remember. Oh, well, it's an old movie. It's been remade about 4 times, but that's probably the most famous incarnation of it. And Hildy was, I believe, the name. They had been married and now he was her editor and she was a reporter. And in the movie, I think she was going to see some guy, who was sentenced to death's row. And going to be executed anyway. So I'm pretty sure that's why I used that name, Hildy. That was a reference to an old time movie from the 30s or 40s. So anyway, so there were a lot of famous reporters in that prison, and yeah, and she said, hey, she says a prisoner didn't escape, Captain America escaped, and there's nobody else like him. Nobody else could possibly have pulled that off. And so they say, yeah, she's right, which is probably not the story most reporters would take from that. They'd say, no, you know what? It's going to sell papers, ultra secure prison proved to be not so secure,
Sure. Yeah.
Jailbreak at the safe prison, whatever. So, but because she says that, they all go, yeah, she's right. We no story here, everybody. Let's go home. So that was, thank you, Bob. You're a good audience. And I appreciate it. I like to get the laugh now and then. So, so that was, so I thought it had some decent action. It had the prison reform element. It was a nice, shout out to that earlier Lee and Kirby story. And I thought as a fill-in issue, I thought it was very, it was very competent. I won't say it was great, but I thought it was good. It was fine. I never thought my writing, listen, I'm a very humble guy and many would say deservedly so. I think the industry is so full of talented people and I just think it's a happy miracle that I worked in it as long as I did. And enjoyed it and had fun and stuff like that. It was great. And speaking of the cover, because we were going to get to that, I think eventually, what happened was Kupperberg, who did the interior and did a perfectly fine job, also drew a cover and I described what I wanted. I said, Captain America behind bars. Okay. And he did it and it was solid, but I had an idea in mind for it. And what he had done would not have translated. Even if I had inked it and done the approach with the color hold that I did. And what I did was, I had conversations with Jim Starlin, who had a background in printing. And the thing about Jim was he was very smart. And he said, there's ways you can do color holds, you can do red lines, you can do this and that and the other thing, and he used to use graphic, pop art type stuff in his work and so on. And he knew, he sort of explained to me how some of this stuff could be done. And I said, that sounds interesting. I'm going to experiment. And so I went home. I went to Shooter. I said, Jim, this cover is not what I had in mind. Can I take a crack at it? And he said, sure, knock yourself out. I said, okay. So I went to home and I sat down and I figured out a way to do it. So it's Cap holding the bars and and there's areas where the color on his costume stops, but there's no holding line. I have some blacks, minimal blacks, where he's casting a shadow from his face, or his hands on the bars are casting a shadow, or blah blah blah. But the rest of it, then I put it at an angle, which made logically no sense, but a prison, a barred prison window, with parallel bars, which in the real world would have been on the same plane as on the same direction as the bars, because the bars would be vertical, and the window behind them, the bars should have been vertical. But by tilting it, I made it more interesting, and it allowed the blue. I made his costume, which is primarily blue, bleed into the background, and it was the same shade of blue. So I didn't do anything to make a distinction to get the depth on it, but graphically, it was a very interesting approach. And I was inspired by Steve Ditko, who had done a cover early in his Spider-Man run. I think it was the first cover with the Molten Man.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It was a black. Yeah.
And Spider-Man was in shadows, and there was a cast black shadow. And you know, I think maybe his legs were still out of the shadows, but his upper torso was completely defined by the red parts of the costume, like where the arms were. The arms were solid black, and they bled into the background black. Mm-hmm. But you could see his gloves, and the strip up the side of his arm, and right. Then the chest. The V-shaped chest thing and the belt, and those things were colored, solid red with the webbing on them. So you had this great, and I just remember as a kid just seeing that image and going, "What? How did he do this? Why this works? This is so great." And then I found out at some point, and I don't know if this was before or after I did the Cap cover, but there was an old-time illustrator from the early part of the 20th century, and his name was Cole Phillips, and he had a very distinctive style, and it was called the Fadeaway Girls. And if you're out there, anybody who's listening to this or watching this, I should say, look him up. Google Coles Phillips or Fadeaway Girls. And he did this exact same kind of design thing, and he used it over and over on many magazine covers from the earlier part of that century. And it was the same. He'd have women, and they'd be in dresses, and they'd have sometimes they'd have like elaborate sort of patterns and stuff, but the color would blend into the background or blend into part of the rest of the cover. Sometimes there's one where there's a girl like kneeling in front of a picket fence, and you can only see the shape of her like legs against the picket fence because it blots out the picket fence. It's a white picket fence, but it melds with the background. And he did, I don't know how many of these things, dozens probably. And it was his stock in trade. It was his signature, illustration. The same way Leyendecker, did stuff with all those hatchy blobs of color in the different areas of of his paintings. That look, this is JC, not his brother. But he would do that, and I use that approach, that technique, on a number of other covers over the years. I did a Spider-Man where he's inside, Spectacular Spider-Man. He's in a planetarium, and so it's black, and the whole interior is spattered with stars, and they also go across all the black areas of his costume. So little dots of stars. And the only thing, again, defining his figure is, where the red parts of his costume are. And then I've also got the owls flying in there, and also, I don't remember the story at all, but also Doc Ock, his tentacles are coming in from the open doorway too. So there's a lot going on there. But again, the main thing is that Spider-Man blends into the background. I did one also in Spectacular where he's against a series of totally illogical girders that are solid black, and some go behind him. And so if it's behind him, if his chest is in the foreground, they disappear behind his chest, but some of them are in front of him, and they run over, his gloves or his boots. And so there's these abstract girders, solid black, his costume, solid black. And again, I have Doc Ock's tentacles coming in from off panel, and those are, I did a red line, which is a thing you could do so there's no holding line in the printed final copy. Red lines had been used in newspaper strips too. What you do is, I know Hal Foster used to use them sometimes on the cloud areas. You would outline the red you'd outline certain stuff with a red line, red ink. And on the black plate, when you're printing it, the red shows up as black. But then the engravers, they would look at the original, and if there's a note, remove red lines, they could go into the actual printing plate. In the old days, they were made out of steel or metal of some kind, and they could route them out. They just scrape out those particular lines. So where the coloring stopped, originally they had seen a black line there, and now that black line was removed. And so it was held, just by the color. And so I did that, on some of these covers as well, that one with the girders I mentioned in particular. And I did another one where the Spider-Man in his black costume is lowering himself from the ceiling and, coming out of the darkness, which is solid black. And then there's a doorway. It's a down shot, and there's a doorway, and the lizard is stepping into the room and, casting a shadow, and he's framed by the, I think a yellow light or a white light in the doorway. And Spider-Man is all black and, with a little bit of white as the black costume was designed. And that also I thought was a very effective cover. And John Byrne did some covers like that. I don't know if he's inspired by mine or if he also knew Coles Phillips, but he did, some Spider-Mans where I think he was framed against a bunch of abstract buildings at night with just the lights in the windows, defining the shapes of the building and popping the Spider-Man figure out and stuff like that. So it became a thing.
Well, it is an amazing cover that you did for 260. And we're doing right now a little fun thing with March Madness, tying it into a bracket, for college basketball, right? Yeah. Where there's those brackets. We're doing the same thing with favorite Captain America covers. So we're doing that. And one of the ones that's being nominated is this cover, cover 260, because it is a fun cover, and you described it wonderfully. So real quick, around this time that you were doing some Captain America work, you did a long run as penciler for the Avengers with writer Roger Stern.
I think it was about 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice run.
Yeah.
Of course, you certainly drew a lot of Cap in them.
Yeah.
In the mid 80s, you got to revisit Cap when you penciled the sequel to Secret Wars, which was written by Jim Shooter. It was 9 issues, and you were the penciler.
Yeah.
And it sold really well for Marvel.
Yeah.
But there was some feedback from fans and critics, not happy about it. And so what do you remember about that at that time? Because do you think the feedback was about the story? Do you think there was resistance because it was all these tie-ins, and it was the first time you had to Marvel publish a story where the reader would have to purchase multiple titles in order to read the entire story?
Well, what about the first Secret Wars series? That had tie-ins too, didn't it?
Yes, but not in this way. It was more of a tie-in, but it was a supplemental stories. Whereas this one was almost like the story continued in these.
So this was integral to following the story in the second.
Right.
Well, clearly, that's what we intended. The idea was, don't pick and choose. Buy everything we publish and buy it now. So, it was strictly a commercial thought, and I can understand why some people might have been offended or pissed off by that, but at the same time, our job as a publishing company is to sell as many of our product as we can, and so I thought it was a legitimate tactic. We weren't forcing anybody to buy them, but if you really wanted to follow the entire story, you sort of had to. But clearly, it was a strategy that was successful because from then on, I think both companies did multi, crossovers every year. They'd get together and have editorial meetings. What are we going to do this year for a super crossover where everybody has to buy every issue of all our comics? So, for better or for worse, that was the way things were going. And it did sell well. I wonder if it wouldn't have sold better if they had a better artist on it. But what happened actually, originally Sal Buscema was going to draw the series.
Mm-hmm.
And I love Sal's work. He's real, he's a real solid pro, good, good action, good storytelling. It's, I think he's held in very high regard. I think, the only real drawback to Sal's stuff is that he had the misfortune, I'm doing quote marks again, of being John Buscema's brother. And John, was a super artist. I mean, just great. He was fast. He was great. He drew like a son of a gun. And will tell you the same thing. He says, "Oh, I couldn't hold a candle to John stuff." But absolutely professional and very, very good style. And so he drew the entire first issue. And I don't remember the genesis, but I was talking to Jim Shooter at a Christmas party, which I think was at the Illustrators Club. No, the Players Club, which is a place where actors, when they were in New York, if they were, I don't know if they had their acting cards, SAG or whatever the Broadway equivalent is, could come there and rent a room for however long they needed to stay. So I was talking to Jim, and I got along great with Jim. I'm not saying everybody did, but I certainly did. And Jim, I don't remember, he said, I asked Sal to make a few changes in this issue. And he said, this is ridiculous. I never have to change my stuff. I don't know if he quit. I don't know if Jim fired him. Maybe Jim fired him if he refused to make the changes. Maybe Sal said, I don't need these hassles. I can draw, my regular 5 books a month and not be bothered, whatever he was doing. And I don't think I knew that, but I had said to Jim, I said, you and I ought to do a job together sometime. And he said, yeah, I'd like that. He says, hey, wait a minute. I've got this situation with Sal where he doesn't want to continue on Secret Wars 2. Would you want to draw that? And, I said, now I put my foot in it because, this is going to be a very high profile job. And I do want to work with Jim. I'd like to see how that goes. But, I thought about it. I said, you know what? Besides the experience of it, this is going to be a high profile job. So it's good and bad. And it'll probably sell a lot. And that means at the time they'd started paying the royalties or incentives, as I think Marvel called it. And I said, yeah, sure. I'd be up for it. So he said, all right, then you know what? He says, it's not fair to you for Sal to get the royalties on the first issue, which will be the best selling issue. So he says, so you can redraw the entire issue and you'll get the royalties. And, Sal will be paid, his page rate. But, if you're going to do the series, then you should, get the royalties for every issue. And I thought that was very fair-minded of him. And I never actually talked to Sal about it. I'd like to sometime. Anyway, just to see what his feelings were on the whole situation. He was probably felt he was well shed of it. But, whatever, I jumped in with both feet. But by this time, of course, we used up any lead time that we might have had because Sal had already drawn the first issue. He should have been starting the second issue. We got pushed back a month. So, I was starting from scratch on the first issue. So I had to do breakdowns, which it's like a coloring book version of a comic book. You do all the basic drawing, all the storytelling, but without any, fine details, cross-hatching, feathering, or spotting of blacks. You might throw in an X here and there to indicate a black area, but basically that falls to the inker to complete that part of the process. And it was a very effective approach for Marvel, especially in those days when they were desperately trying to get all the books on time. And so you could have a guy like Sal or John Buscema who could do breakdowns. They would do 4 or 5 pages a day. And these were pages of, they were slightly looser pencils, but any competent inker could take them and turn them into a finished page. And the penciler would get I think at the time was $25 a page less, and the inker would get that $25 a page more for doing the finishes. So I did breakdowns of that, and then they got Steve Lealoha, who's a wonderful inker and artist, and he did the finishes. But we were under the gun from the very start. We were right up against the deadline every minute of the whole 9-issue series. And, I think we did okay considering the time constraints. But yeah, certainly, I would have liked to have had more time to do more polished pencils. And I'm sure Steve would have liked to have had more time to, polish up my pencils with his inks. So, I know there were some disgruntled fans out there, and, I'm sorry for that. But, I thought the storyline was interesting. I think Jim writes a good, solid story. And I think he did that. And he was very gracious about, the storytelling. He says, look, you did what I needed you to do. You told the story clearly and all that stuff. And, it's not an easy job, drawing all those characters and all those issues, and trying to squeeze them into panels. And yeah, it was a tough one. And it did pay very well. The royalties were very good. But I don't have a penny of that stuff now. So,
well, listen, you I think you're a little too hard on yourself. It is difficult to do a multi-character series. Plus, it's a difficult act to follow Mike Zeck too. So,
Zeck's a terrific artist, and and I'll bet he wishes he had at least one of those pages back. Did you hear about that Spider-Man page from Secret Wars 1 that sold for over $3.5 million?
Yeah, it was the first appearance of the symbiote. So
I don't care.
Yeah. I think no, you're right. It was a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
I think that was the reason it went so high.
That's clearly, there are people who said that's a historic,
right,
of historic importance in the comics industry. And ironically, Mike did not do I don't think the panel where that appears. I think part of the page he said was redrawn by somebody on staff, possibly Ramita, and inked by Jack Abel, who was also, around the bullpen at the time, because there was some story element that was, that Jim wanted changed or something. Who wrote that original series?
That would be Jim.
It was Jim. Okay.
Yeah, Jim Shooter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I heard that that there was something in the storytelling that he, wanted clarified or done in a different way. And so apparently half of that page or more is not drawn by Zeck and Beatty. So ironic.
It's ironic. So back to your work on Cap.
Sure, try and get back to that. I dare you.
So you joined the series, I think, in '88 as a regular inker.
Yeah.
And at this time, you've already been writing and penciling West Coast Avengers for some time, and you're continuing with that work. Plus, you're inking.
I wasn't writing the West Coast Avengers. Steve Englehart was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wrote one. I wrote one issue.
Yeah,
and that was only. I was trying to. My goal on that book was to try to do more issues consecutively than Kirby had done on the Fantastic Four. Which, would have been nice, but it's one of the few ways I can compare myself to Kirby. I did more issues of a book than he did.
Right.
But there's probably other artists in the industry.
In the mix. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike Sikowski on the Justice League, or who knows what else, but I love Kirby stuff, and I thought it'd be fun to try to, but at one point Englehart decided he was going to take a vacation. How dare he? And so they said, oh, well, that's fine. We'll get a fill-in issue done. Everybody can have a breather. I said, no, I'm trying to do this uninterrupted run. I said, how about if I write a story? And I did one issue, and it was okay. It was basically, there was an alien. Oh, it was, there's a story about the 5 blind wise men and the elephant. I think it's a Chinese.
Chinese proverb, right?
Yeah. Something. Yeah. And they said, what is this elephant we've been hearing about? And they brought these 5 guys into the room, and each one put their hands, because they're blind, on the elephant to see what it was like. And, One thought the elephant was like a snake because he felt its tail, and one thought it was like the trunk of a tree because he felt its leg, and one thought it was like a spear because he felt the tusk, and one felt the trunk, and it was like the vines on the trees. I don't know. They all came up with a different version of what an elephant looked like. And so I did some kind of an alien who they were going to invade Earth or something. And he said, but the danger is we hear of these Avengers who protect the Earth. So, with our technology, we're going to make one of our warriors who has the characteristics of all of the Avengers. And so he was the composite Avenger, I think I called it. And, and it was a good visual, on the cover. It was a guy who was part Tigra and part, Cap and part, I don't even remember who all the different characters, Hawkeye and Mockingbird, but they still managed to, beat him, of course, right, and stave off the thing. So that was my one issue writing of West Coast Avenger. I wrote few things over my career that I can remember.
Well, you were also
everything I wrote.
At this time, you're also inking Alpha Flight, X-Terminators, Bullwinkle and Rocky, The X Factor. You were working on Marvel Comics Present. This is a lot of volume, right? 3-4 books a month. How do you handle such a workload?
I don't sleep. You know what? People have asked me that, and also people who knew, people not in the industry, said, you work at home, which of course nowadays is very common with the COVID problem.
Right.
I go on Staples, they say the solution for all your WFH, problems. And it took me a minute to figure out that meant work from home. But in those days, only as weird freelancers did it. And I'm not the most disciplined person. But I did find that if I took on more work than I could reasonably handle, then I didn't have time to sit around and how am I going to do this? When is the muse going to bite me in the ass? No, I'd wake up and I go, oh my God, I have to get to work because I've got 4 jobs sitting here that I got to get to working on.
Right.
And I would knuckle down. I'd, throw probably a Coke in my mouth, Coca-Cola. Let's clarify. Yeah. and I'd get right to work, and I'd work all day. I'd take a break for lunch, and I work all day, and then I'd have dinner with my family, and if maybe I'd watch a couple TV shows, and then I'd work all night. And sometimes I would go many days on minimal sleep. I mean, I remember at some point, heading towards the office with the portfolio full of stuff to deliver, and the subway, as it often was pretty full, and I was so standing up. And I'd fall asleep on my feet, and I'd only I feel my knees buckling, and I go, oh, and I wake up. So, I found that the most effective way for me to get a lot done was to do more than I really could. And it wasn't just, and yes, in those days in particular, the more you did, the more you got paid. It was piecework. You did a page, you got paid for a page. You did 3 pages, get paid for 3 pages. All my favorite artists, generally speaking, there were exceptions, but, Kirby and Ditko and Gil Kane and Carmine and, you name it, the artists I grew up loving, most of them were pretty fast, and you had to be to make a living in comics. And so I don't think there's any shame in working fast. And also, and not, incidental, I love doing the stuff. From the time I was a little kid, I wanted to draw comics. Miraculously, I actually figured out a way, to get into the industry because I lived out in Michigan. I didn't know anybody who drew comic books. I met Starlin. He also wanted to do comic books. I met Buckler, blah, blah, blah. But as a kid growing up, I had no realistic expectation of doing that for a living. And I was in college. I was in, Michigan, LS&A, which is Literature, Science, and the Arts, which is a general curriculum. And, I was stumbling through and not a great student. And at some point, my counselor said, well, science is not your gig, because I had gotten a D I took a course in advanced biology. Why? So it seemed like a good idea at the time. So as Steve McQueen once said. But anyway, so midway through my sophomore year, I said, listen, it was time to declare a major. I said, I don't think I'm cut out for this normal life stuff. I'd like to pursue my dream and become a cartoonist. And so he said, well, so what does that entail? And I said, well, I got to learn how to draw better. He says, well, and I guess you could try to transfer to the art school. They had their own art school in the university. So I went over, I called up the dean of the art school and I said, Dean, I want to transfer to the art school. He says, well, have you got any samples of your work? I said, I do. And I went up and he had an interview with him and we're chatting and I'm showing him my samples, which are, mostly comic book type things, panel pages and so on. Some, I remember I had a drawing of some nude women around a fountain, which I thought was more artsy, but it was still drawn like a comic book, artist. And he looked at the stuff and he chuckled and he says, well, you've definitely got something going on here. He says, but I had gotten a D in French that previous semester. He says, you got a D in French. I said, I'm aware. He says, there's a language requirement in lit school, but there's no language requirement in the art school. I said, that's great. And he said, no. He says, it's not great. He says, because we can't let you transfer to the art school with a failing grade in French. And I said, why not if I don't have to take a language in art school? And he said, well, I know it doesn't make sense. He said, but, if we let you do that, then everybody's going to transfer into the art school to avoid the language requirement. And I looked at him and I said, that can't be true. I said, how many people are going to have, be able to show you stuff that qualifies to get into art school, drawings, paintings, whatever, or even want to get into the art school? Are they going to, go to that kind of an extreme just to avoid the languages? He says, you're right. He says, you're absolutely right. I said, this is the biggest catch-22. I said, boy, that book was written just to, to set an example of this. He said, you're right. But however, those are the rules. We can't let you transfer with a failing grade in French. So I took that semester of French over. And I also had to boost up some of my other grades. I took one class in mechanical drawing, figuring it was sort of drawing related, but it isn't. It's really, it's like ruling lines and so on. Excuse me. So and it was I believe it was a self-grading class. It was the 60s. So. 60s or 70s. And so we were all hippies. And so by the end of the semester, the teacher said, well, what do you think you deserve in the class? And I said, or what are you giving yourself? And I said, I'm going to give myself an A. And he said, really? Because my mechanical drawing was not spectacular. I said, yeah. He says, you think you deserve an A? I said, no, I probably deserve a B, but I'm trying to transfer into the art school and I need to get my grades up. And since you kindly offered to let me grade myself, I'm going to take the A. And then he made some comment like that I would rot in hell for being dishonest.
Whoa.
He didn't say that literally, but he said, oh, wherever you end up, you'll get what you deserve. Something to those. It was a thinly disguised implication that I was going to hell for giving myself one grade point higher. So anyway, but I managed to get a C in French the second time around. And my French teacher, by the way, was very sweet about it. And she says, you have a great accent, but usually people who have a good accent, they do better in the class. I said, I'm not good at memorizing. Sorry, I just I never got good with it, never got conversational. But sacre bleu, what could I do? So I got a
c'est la
C in
vie.
that. I got an A in that. I think I got an A or a B in one of my English classes. And anyway, I boosted my grades up enough so that they could, without guilt, let me transfer to the art school. And then after that, I got all A's and B's. In fact, I ended up making the dean's list near the end of my college career.
Oh,
so,
that's excellent. Yeah. So when you were inking Kieran Dwyer on Captain America, he was a new penciler at the time. I think he had only penciled 4 previous comics total.
I unpacked the crate he came in.
Yeah, he was fresh.
That's how new he was. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it like working with a new penciler, and what kind of growth did you see in the 15 issues that you were together with him?
Yeah. I thought Kieran hit the ground running. I thought he was very solid, very good draftsman from the get-go. I liked his work. It was tight. It was easy to ink. I enjoyed it. But he certainly improved over the course of, that time. 15 issues would have been more than a year. And he got better and better. And, he was a comic fan. His mother had been divorced and ended up marrying John Byrne.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think, I don't know how that went. I've heard that maybe, he probably was a fan of Byrne's work. And I think maybe then having him as a stepfather might have been less fun. I don't really know. I know none of the details, but I think I've heard stuff to that effect. So if I'm wrong, John, forgive me. Kieran, forgive me. It's all hearsay. And, I say what I hear. So, but I don't know if they got along great or not. But the bottom line is that he was, a very good, solid artist and storyteller. My one kick, which is my kick with everybody, is I thought his stuff was well drawn, but it wasn't the most dynamic stuff in the world. But I like dynamics. I like stuff to be action packed. Hence the fact, that I'm Kirby is my all-time favorite. I mean, you can't compare anybody to Kirby, and it tends to come off fairly mild,
Sure.
Because Kirby's just the king of the action stuff. But, his drawing improved over the course of it. Was I the first guy who inked him? I thought they had.
He had done 2 Cap issues before you came on board.
Yeah, I thought Kieran did a great stuff, and I think Grunwald was writing some of the stuff, including that Serpent Society or whatever they were. All the characters who were named after snakes of any kind, and there were 2 issues in 1989 where you filled in as a penciler for Kieran. Yes.
It was 356, 357, and it was a 2-part story where Cap was turned into a teenager.
And I think I did half of one issue. I did the latter half of one issue that led into the full issue story that I did. Yeah. And
I got to tell you, so Cap was turned into a teenager because he wanted to infiltrate this teen runaway cult run by Mother Night.
Right.
And there's this one panel that you drew that was shocking, especially to a teenage Rick. Okay.
Yeah.
There was a character, Hoodwink.
Did I turn you into a teenage wreck? Is that what happened?
Right. So Hoodwink seemingly snaps a young girl's neck and just like snap. And now it's revealed in the next issue was a hypnotic spell on Cap.
Right.
Think she was killed.
Right.
But when you first got that script for 356, did you know it was not real, or did you really think you were drawing a young girl's very visual death?
I have no idea. I have no recollection. My guess is, who wrote it? Sterno?
No, Grunwald.
It was still Grunwald? Okay. My guess is that he just wrote it as he snaps her neck. And, if nothing else, I'm a good, clear storyteller. So I think I remember her standing behind her and just going, which they do in the movies all the time now. I don't imagine it's that. Can it be that easy to actually snap a person's neck? Anyway, and then, it was revealed, like you said, the next issue, she was not in fact dead, but had been, it would have been a shame too, because Cap, he went in to infiltrate this group, this cult. And, then he befriended this girl and got her killed. But no, it turned out she was okay, which is, sounds like maybe it would have satisfied the comics code, although maybe they wouldn't have liked the graphic way I showed it. But it's not like he tore her neck off and or blood was spurting her, and he just like head went to a weird angle and she was gone. So yeah, I don't recall really, honestly, after all this time, how it was originally plotted. But it wouldn't surprise me if Mark just had her. Okay, he kills the girl, and then the next issue, oh, she's back. So why not? Nobody's ever really dead in comics.
That's right.
How true.
That's right.
Right.
Hey, Al, we actually do have a couple questions from some of our listeners. So Joshua Van Dyne asks, of all the things that you worked on, whether as a writer, editor, inker, what's that? Van Dyne?
Janet Van Dyne?
I don't know, but we're going to have to ask him for sure. Yeah. Now we have a question for him.
This question doesn't have a sting to it. Go ahead.
Oh, very nicely played.
Oh, thanks.
So of all the things you worked on, is there one job that you found the most fun?
No.
All right.
No, I like when I said earlier, I love doing the work. One of the, Marvel for many, many years, they kept me very busy. I made a nice living. I said, listen, you guys have been very, very good to me. And if you ever need help on jobs, I'm always happy to pitch in. And I did, Marvel was always up against it. And very often, if they had like 2 or 3 or 5 pages, they needed help inking or even penciling, but mostly as an inker, I would come in and fill in at the last minute, stuff that Joe Rubenstein did a lot of, a number of guys, got reputations for being reliable. And if they got into a bind, if a penciler was still churning out his pencils, and if the inker had the first 10 pages and was still working on them, and another 3 pages of pencils came in, they said, we can't wait for the inker to finish what he's got now. Find somebody else to do these 3 pages. And so I would, gladly pitch in. And also I had an extra secret advantage over a lot of these guys.
What was that?
Besides the ability to go without sleep for long periods of time. I can't do it now, God knows, but I live on Long Island. John and Ramita, Virginia live on Long Island. John and Virginia used to work at the Marvel offices, and they drove in every day. Okay? If I got a package at 10 o'clock in the morning from FedEx, which was the earliest you could get a delivery in those days, and it was an emergency situation, I could literally work all day, grab a bite to eat, and then work all night till about 6 in the morning. And then whatever I had done, I could jump in my car and I'd put the pages in an envelope. I'd drive over to the Ramitas. It was about a 20-minute drive maybe. And I would put the envelope in their back storm door. And then on the way out of the house to the garage to get their car, they'd say, that Milgrom was here again. And they would take the pages in. And so miraculously, they could get, depending on how badly I was rushing to get stuff done, 2 or 3, maybe even 4 pages done. Because I had essentially 2 full working days. I could work from 10 in the morning till 8 at night. And then I could work from 11 in the evening till 6 or 7 in the morning. I don't remember exactly the time. I could get like the equivalent of 2 full work days in. And inking 2 pages in a day in those days was not beyond my capabilities. So, the pages would show up bright and early, in the morning, like 2 days, if they shipped them on a Wednesday, I'd get them on a Thursday. Friday morning, they'd be in the Ramita's back door and they'd be in the office first thing in the morning. So that gave me a huge advantage because if I'd send them, if I tried to send them FedEx, I wouldn't have gotten as much work done and they wouldn't arrive until, if I got them on a Wednesday, worked all day Thursday, I'd only get maybe a page or 2 done at the most. And then, they'd get them, then even if I shipped them that same day, they'd get them Friday. But if I couldn't get all the pages done, I wouldn't be able to ship them until Friday. Then they'd get them on Monday. So I had my own private courier service,
nice,
which Virginia yelled at me about.
You save postage and gas.
You know what? That was not my goal. She actually said that. She said, you can send the stuff FedEx. Marvel will pay for it. And I said, Virginia, I know. I send tons of stuff FedEx, but if they've got an emergency, and she was the production manager, so I felt like I was kind of helping her out. I was doing her a favor by working like a dog and getting these things done, and then driving to her house to deliver them. They didn't have to go. And she, but she for some reason felt like I was, I don't know, taking advantage of her or something. And it did. It saved Marvel money too.
Sure.
It didn't save me any money. And I told her that. I said, Virginia, doesn't save me money. Marvel's saving the money, and you're getting the pages that they so desperately need.
Right.
And I one time I asked John. I said, John, Virginia told me she's upset that I keep dropping pages at your house. And he said, I don't know why. We're going in anyway. It's nothing to us. It's just carry an envelope with it. I said, okay, good. So it doesn't bother you? He said, no, keep doing it. So I said, okay, great. Thanks.
All right.
So I ignored her at my own peril, and I listened to John.
Well, we got a second question from Ralph Warner, who knows that you have worked on well over 1,000 covers in your career.
I don't know that.
Placing you, I think, a number 7 on the all-time list. But are there any that stand out as like your favorites?
Well, yeah. As opposed to my previous answer of no. First of all, did he actually go through and count?
No. So there's a website. And it's called Mike's Amazing World. So you can go to Mike'sAmazingWorld.com. It's a great reference.
Okay.
So any favorites?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Yeah, I have a number of covers that I thought, first of all, the covers were probably the best thing I did. I thought, I was a competent storyteller, not a great artist, penciler type, but storytelling clear. And I was lucky to be blessed with some very good, solid old pro inkers on my stuff, including Joe Sinnott and Jim Mooney and guys like that who made the stuff, Jack Abel, turned my chicken scratchings into very polished, professional looking stuff. But covers, I could raise my game a little bit and do a better job on a single image. And the Captain America cover, I thought, was one of my best. I had a run on Peter Parker where I did not every cover in a consecutive run. There were individual issues that other people did, including Ed Hannigan, and I think Greg LaRocque did a couple here and there. And but that cover I mentioned where Spider-Man's in the planetarium was, I thought, a very good cover. And then once I was writing and drawing the strip, I had a number of covers that I thought were among my best. The one where this is a common meme, but where Spider-Man's holding the Black Cat. It's a bit of a down shot, and she's bleeding on the floor and stuff like that, and he's in a spotlight. I thought that was a strong cover. I thought that the one with the girders that I mentioned, and the one with the lizard. I did a run where I like this one where like Spider-Man and the Black Cat they're fighting the Blob. I thought that was a striking cover. I had a couple Hulk covers where he was first fighting the West and East Coast Avengers, and then the next cover they were carrying him as if they'd killed him. All the heroes were like, lined up on each side of his body, carrying him in a funeral procession or something. I thought that was good. Yeah. I did a number on Peter Parker again with Cloak and Dagger and Silvermane. That was the guy who was part robot, the criminal guy they turned into a part.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Several of those I did. I did one as a triptych with Spider-Man in the middle, I think, and Cloak and Dagger on either side of him. And I did some other ones where he and the Black Cat are in it, and they're holding up, I think, maybe Dagger, and it just, the composition was a little bit, off kilter, which made it, visually interesting. That whole run, number 100 on Peter Parker, I thought was a very strong cover where it's a kind of a Will Eisner bit where Spider-Man and the Black Cat and the black costume and did I say Kingpin are all in and around and about the number 100, playing it as part of the background. I did a whole bunch. I liked my run on Kitty Pryde and Wolverine, the miniseries.
Oh yeah, that was really good.
Thanks. I made one mistake that I kick myself to this day. I came up with the idea of dividing each cover just so thematically they had something going on. So the first cover is Kitty, and she's walking from her home in the suburbs in the States, and then walking across this dividing line into Tokyo. Mm-hmm. And my mistake was not having a big looming figure of Wolverine. And the reason I did that was guilt, because he literally did not appear until the last panel of the issue. But that, but the Wolverine was the big selling point of that series. He
yes,
was
it was.
He was the hot character. And I only got to do it because I whined and complained. I said, when am I going to get to do an X-Men related thing? And, usually they use better artists than me, but, Chris Claremont and Wheezy, who was the editor on it, took pity on me. And so Wheezy said, hey, Chris, can you write a miniseries for Milgrom to draw? And he said, sure, to his credit. And I don't know how he feels about it now, but at the time he said, this was the favorite story that I ever wrote. He was very happy with it. And so I feel as if, I don't know whether that was because of my artwork or in spite of my artwork, or if the artwork didn't have any say in the matter at all. But, one thing I did, which I rarely did in those days, was I penciled and inked the whole series. And again, I was doing so much work at the time, it was probably ill-advised. But I had been developing an inking style that I thought was more uniquely my own for my own stuff. I didn't necessarily use it on other pencilers, but on me I did. And I think it worked on my covers. And so I had each of those covers was divided down the middle by different elements, but it worked out the same way with a little gutter down the middle. One, it was somebody holding a staff, like a wooden staff.
Right.
One, it was the bad guy, Ogun or whatever his name was, slicing his sword downward, so the speed line made the dividing line. One, it was it was that demon mask that he wore, and that was split down the center with Kitty on one side and Wolverine on the other, because he was the bad guy and Wolverine were fighting for Kitty's soul, so to speak. And so I came up with a way to do it. And I also, this is a minor thing that only matters to me, but I designed a number of covers over my career. Once they started doing the UPC boxes, those ugly lines.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Universal pricing code. I found out that you could eliminate them on the direct only copies if that area was either all black or all white. And so if you look at those covers, 4 of the 6 covers on that series have no UPC box on the direct sales copies. And, they're an eyesore. I mean, they were a necessary evil, but on the direct sales copies, because they were pre-sold and there were no returns, you didn't need them. So usually they just have a box with a Spider-Man head in it.
Right.
Or, some other, there were different incarnations of it. But I figured out ways to eliminate them on all those covers. And also on a number of other covers, some Avengers covers I did, some of the Peter Parker covers I did. If you see the direct sales copies, sometimes there'll be a box with Spider-Man's head in it, and behind it is an all black area of the cover, which means that they could have eliminated it if they just followed my border notes. And I'd write, please remove UPC box from direct only copies. And, either the editor or the engraver or the printer, somebody dropped the ball and didn't. And so it would be there anyway, which used to drive me nuts because I went to the extra little bit of effort to design these to get rid of them. And then they put them in there anyway. So that drove me crazy. But 4 of the 6 Kitty Wolverine covers I managed to do it. And other covers that I liked were I did some Avenger covers that I was happy with, but I rarely inked those. Usually, Joe Sinnott was doing the book, and so, out of respect to him, I said, yeah, Joe get ink the cover. That's fine with me. You can't ask for a better inker. One of the spectacular Spider-Man covers I did that I liked was the one with the Gladiator slashing through the logo. Now that's also
that's a great cover.
Simonson did it with Beta Ray Bill smashing the Thor logo. Other people have done it on other logos. It was not a new idea, but that may be the single best Spider-Man figure I ever did in my life. I felt like the anatomy was working really well on it. I had gotten that rough kind of approach to inking, which borrowed some Ditko, but had a different overall look to it. But definitely I'd been taking a bath in Ditko, looking at the way he accented stuff, and he put little dashes along the edge of things for no apparent reason, but it worked. And I would do that. That's one of my favorites. What else? I don't know. I loved a lot of them. I did a lot of them. I did a lot of covers over John Romita Jr. And for a while there, I was trying to come up with some different little technique on each one of them. Like one of them, I did something with Zipatone, and one of them I had one where there's a giant juggernaut head, behind Spidey's figure swinging in, and I took it and I did wash work, diluted ink, so to get gray tones, and then we sent it out to I don't know if it was a separate place or the engravers, but they made what was called a Velox, and what they would do is they had screens with different textures or looks to them, almost like a Zipatone approach. But what they did was I had them shoot it with a screen of concentric circles. So if you look at that cover, all the different shades of gray, go from being wash work, where they're actually gray, to being black line work, but, of varying degrees of thickness. So it was lighter or darker, depending on how thick the line was. And it was radiating out from the center of the juggernaut's head. And, so his whole head was made up of these concentric circles. And I thought it was a very striking, strong look to it and stuff like that. I did other, I did some.
Well, you've done a lot. I mean, obviously with over 1,000 covers, there's so many to choose from, but you named some really good ones there. That's for sure.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I tried. And I think I did a real good job on, inking certain other people too on occasion. A couple of times I inked Howard Chaykin. That was a challenge, and because Howard usually inks his own stuff, but I thought the results were pretty good. I did a Scarecrow cover for one of the Marvel. They had a reoccurring Scarecrow character at Marvel on one of the books. Don't remember the title now. And I had one of his science fiction characters, Cody something or other. It was Cody Starbuck, Cody. I don't remember. But anyway, it was a nice cover where the character is wearing a Flash Gordon-y kind of outfit and a cape he's got a mechanical falcon on his arm, and there's a pretty girl clinging to his, foot, like the Conan painting that Frazetta did. And I thought I did a pretty good job interpreting that. I know one guy, Sal Amendola, who was a very good artist and a real nice guy, and we got along great. And he did a Scarecrow cover for DC, the Batman villain. And it was a big figure of the Scarecrow looming over and towards Batman, who's, I think, running away from him or something. But, I remember, I don't remember who the editor was. It might have, I don't know, who was editing Batman at the time? Was it Julie Schwartz or something? Might have been. But I remember I liked Sal, and his drawing was really good. He did a character called Phoenix for Atlas, the Martin Goodman company, that they decided to try to compete with Marvel once he'd sold the company. Anyway, so I like Sal stuff, and it was well drawn, and I tried to do a real good job. And this happened to me on occasion. The next time I ran into him, he said, "Al, that cover, you did such a great inking job on the cover." And it really sounded like he was surprised, if not shocked. And I said, Yeah, it was a real good cover, Sal, and I wanted to do it justice. He said, "Oh, I'm so happy with it. I wish I could have gotten you to ink a lot of my other stuff." And I said, "Well, thanks. That's flattering." And one of the main things I got a kick out of was surprising people, because every inker will say they tailor their inks to whoever the penciler is, but almost nobody actually does that. They think they do it in their mind's eye, they do it, but really not so much. You get a guy like Joe Sinnott, he inks like Joe Sinnott. You get Terry Austin, beautiful stuff, a lot of detail, strong inking, looks like Terry Austin, But I think my stuff, I call myself an inking chameleon. I would really try to alter my stuff to fit what I felt the penciler was trying to go for. So, that happened a lot, and Shooter once made a comment. He says, "Who inked this?" Al Milgrom. This doesn't look like his stuff. And, I said, "Jim, what does my stuff look like?" He says, "Well, I guess I don't know." And the first time I inked a job by Larry Stroman, he was a new guy with a very offbeat style, not like any other comic book artist you've ever seen. I think Chaykin met him. He was doing street portraits or something by the library, maybe. And anyway, he said, "Hey, you should do some comic book work." And they gave me a job of his to ink. I was inking him on X Factor, of course. And then I believe I started inking my first issue over him. And then they said, "Wait a minute, we got him to do a fill-in issue of Wolverine. Can you, are you available? Can you ink that?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. How soon am I getting the rest of this X Factor?" "Oh, not for a while. He's got to do this. He's got to do Wolverine first." So I did the issue, and I thought I did a pretty good job. And the next time I ran into Larry in the office, he goes, "Oh man, I was real happy with." It's always a surprise to them. It's always, a shock. "I really like what you did on my stuff." I said, "Oh, I'm glad, Larry. I was hoping you would." He goes, No, but you got to understand, I didn't think it was going to look anything like this." I said, "Well, that's, the way you penciled it. What did you think?" He says, "Well, I thought it was going to look like, what you do over Ron Friends." I said, "Well, no, Ron, I love Ron's stuff and I enjoy inking it a lot. It was nice. It was tight." And I thought his stuff was full pencils, and I used to fight with him periodically because he would only voucher it as breakdowns. So I got an extra $25 for inking what was there. That was good, but, very, very, classic marble stuff. Beautiful. I said, "You don't draw anything like Ron Friends." And he said, "Well, no, I know that, but I didn't know whether, you'd be able to ink it accordingly." I said, "That's what I pride myself."
Well, Al, I have to tell you, this has been a fun conversation. I want to tell you how much we've enjoyed wrapping cap with you today, as well as all the other stories behind the stories that you've been able to share.
Too many.
And
yes.
So I know you do a lot of shows, you go to a lot of conventions. For those who want to get in touch with you in case they were interested in maybe a commission or something like that, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Okay. Thank you for asking. And also anybody who runs shows and might be interested in having me as a guest, you can contact me at the following email address. It's editorial, the numeral 4, editorial 4 at AOL.com. I'm an old guy, so I still use AOL. And the other thing is, please mention in the subject line that if you're interested in a commission, or if you're interested to have me at a show, or mention that you saw me on the CAP, fans podcast, just so I know it's not somebody trying to scam me or send me a bug or something like that. I don't need a computer virus, please. So, of course, nobody out there hates me enough to send me one on purpose.
No. And we'll also include your email address in the show notes. So anybody, they can just click on that and open up their email to send you a request.
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah. So again, Al, thanks so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show. And we look forward to seeing what's next for you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, me too. Hopefully staying alive. But,
hey, but speaking of which, Al, happy birthday. I know it's coming up in about a week, right?
It's coming up very shortly.
Yeah.
So I'll be 72 and pleasantly retired. I don't have those deadlines knocking my brains out anymore. For a while there, I couldn't get used to the idea of not working full tilt boogie, and now I can't get used to the idea of working at all. So when somebody sends me a commission, I kind of go, do I really want to do that? Yeah, I got to keep my hand in a little bit. So I'll do that. But I kind of miss the old hectic days, but it's much more relaxing nowadays. So,
well, after all these stories, I got to tell you, you've earned your retirement.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks again, Al.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, Bob, that was a fun conversation with Al, and appreciate him being on the show. Learned a lot about the work behind that goes into all of this. He's certainly, man, he could hold a room for hours.
He could. The thing is, I didn't expect the interview to go that long, Rick, but you could tell, man, he's been in a lot of different situations, a lot of places. He's had a lot of experience. And I think it's just awesome that he is just sharing it. Like we're sitting around a table having a cup of coffee and he's like an old friend.
Yeah. He's a real nice guy. I highly recommend if you have any interest in getting some commissions. Again, maybe it's a recreation of one of his 1,000 covers, or any of the books that he did. By all means, you should reach out to him. His email address is going to be in our show notes. So, and then Bob, coming back next episode, we are going to get into The Road to the Captain, Part 2. So this was something we kicked off in episode 70, and we're going to do an 8-part series where there's 3 issues per episode, and it's starting with issue 327 and making our way to issue 350. And this is the story of Steve Rogers relinquishing his role as Captain America, John Walker's story of picking up the shield and their journeys. And so this next episode is going to be Road to the Captain Part 2, Captain America 330 through 332, which came out in 1987. And stick around for the end, because we get through 332, which is a very heavy issue, which is the one where Steve struggles with giving up his identity. And then Bob and I have a great conversation afterwards about what that meant to us. So come back for that next episode. All right, Bob, as always, it's been fun wrapping cap with you.
As it has. Let's do it again.
All right. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you've been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.